Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you will change everything you think you know about what lurks in the shadows of our world. My name is Mikkel Blackjack Holm, and for the past 15 years, I've been hunting things that shouldn't exist. Things that make grown men wake up screaming in cold sweats. Things that violate every law of nature you learned in school. I'm what they call an elite cryptid hunter, part of a classified military unit that doesn't officially exist. We operate under one simple rule that's kept me breathing all these years. Shoot first, ask questions later. When you're face to face with a creature that can tear through steel plating like tissue paper, hesitation isn't just a mistake. It's a death sentence. Tonight, I'm going to share 3 missions that turned me from just another Marine sniper into something else entirely. 3 hunts that pushed me beyond every limit I thought I had. The skinwalker that stalked us through Nevada's frozen desert, mimicking our voices while picking off my team one by one. The serpentine nightmare that dragged me into Louisiana's black waters, forcing me to fight with nothing but a machete and pure desperation. And finally, the shadow entity in Chernobyl's radioactive ruins that made me realize some battles can only be won through sacrifice. Each mission broke something inside me. Each creature I faced was worse than the last. But I'm still here, still breathing, still hunting. And if you're smart, you'll listen to every word I say. Because these things, they're real. They're out there, and they're getting bolder. The Nevada desert was where I learned that monsters don't always look like monsters. It was February 2018, and the temperature had dropped to minus 12 degrees Fahrenheit when our Black Hawk touched down 40 miles east of Area 51. The mission briefing had been classified beyond belief. Even I didn't know the full scope until we were airborne. All I knew was that 3 ranching families had vanished without a trace over the past month, leaving behind only scattered livestock bones and strange tracks that shifted between human and wolf prints. My team consisted of 3 specialists I'd worked with before. Henrik Larsson, our radio operator, was a tech wizard from Minnesota who could pick up signals from satellites I didn't even know existed. Brat Anderson handled explosives with the precision of a surgeon, his Norwegian accent thickening whenever he got excited about his toys. And Silset Eriksson, our tracker, could read terrain like other people read books. Half Cherokee, half Norwegian, and 100% deadly with that modified crossbow of his. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions. Nothing but frozen sand dunes and jagged rock formations, under a sky so clear you could see every crater on the moon. Our breath formed ice crystals that hung in the air like tiny ghosts. The silence was absolute, the kind that makes your ears ring and your paranoia spike. "Command, this is Blackjack Team, we're on site," Henrik spoke into his encrypted radio, his voice cutting through the stillness. "Beginning sweep pattern Alpha. Copy that, Blackjack. Remember, visual confirmation before engagement. We need one alive if possible." I shouldered my M4, loaded with custom tracer rounds and silver core ammunition, standard protocol for lycanthrope variants. My night vision scope cast everything in an eerie green glow as we moved into formation. Silset took point, reading the ground like a map only he could see. "Multiple tracks here," he whispered, kneeling beside what looked like human footprints that gradually morphed into something else entirely. 4-legged at first, then bipedal. Whatever made these was big, real big. The first sign something was wrong came 30 minutes into our patrol. Henrik's radio crackled with static, then cleared to reveal what sounded like my own voice calling for backup from a position we hadn't reached yet. "Blackjack Team, this is home. We've got movement in the northern canyon. Need immediate support." I grabbed Henrik's radio. "Command, disregard that transmission. All team members are accounted for at my position." The silence that followed lasted exactly 13 seconds. Then Henrik's equipment registered an incoming transmission from the same coordinates where the fake distress call originated. "Blackjack Team, this is Holm." The voice was perfect. Every inflection, every pause exactly as I would make them. Previous transmission was compromised. Enemy contact confirmed. Moving to extraction point Bravo. My blood turned to ice water. Whatever we were hunting had been listening to us, studying us, learning how to become us. The skinwalker wasn't just mimicking voices. It was perfectly replicating them, down to speech patterns it could only have learned from extended surveillance. "New rule," I told my team, checking my weapon's safety. "Nobody moves alone. Nobody takes orders unless you can see my lips moving. And if any of you hear my voice calling from somewhere I'm not standing, you put 3 rounds center mass and ask questions later." Brat's laugh had a nervous edge. "What if it copies one of us? Then we hope we're faster on the draw." We pushed deeper into the canyon system, our thermal imaging revealing nothing but cold stone and colder air. But I could feel eyes on us, that primitive instinct that kept our ancestors alive when saber-toothed cats hunted them in the dark. Something was tracking us with predatory patience. The second incident happened near midnight. Silset's voice called out from behind a rock formation about 50 yards ahead. "Contact! I've got it pinned down behind the ridgeline." But Silset was standing right next to me. The real Silset raised his crossbow toward the sound of his own voice. "That ain't me, boss." I activated my laser sight, painting the rocks where the fake call had originated. "Henrik, can you get a thermal read on that position?" "Negative. Whatever's there, it's not showing up on infrared. Temperature's reading exactly the same as the surrounding stone." That's when we learned the Skinwalker's most terrifying ability. It didn't just steal voices and faces. It could somehow mask its heat signature, becoming thermally invisible. Our high-tech equipment, the gear that had kept us alive through dozens of missions, was useless against a creature that could fool our most sophisticated sensors. "Movement, 2 o'clock, Brat whispered, his accent thick with tension. "Something big, staying just outside our light perimeter." I swept my rifle toward the indicated direction, but saw nothing except shadows that seemed to shift independently of our flashlights. The Skinwalker was playing with us, testing our reactions, learning our tactical responses for some larger strategy we couldn't yet comprehend. Then Henrik's radio crackled again, this time with Brat's voice. "Holm, I've got a clear shot. Permission to engage?" But Brat was standing next to Henrik, his demolition pack still strapped to his back, his mouth closed. "How long has it been listening to us?" I asked the real Brat. "Since before we landed," he replied grimly. "Maybe since before we left base. This thing, it's been studying us." The realization hit like a physical blow. The Skinwalker hadn't just stumbled upon our mission. It had been preparing for us. Every radio transmission, every tactical discussion, every personal detail we'd shared during the flight out here. It had absorbed all of it, becoming the perfect predator for our specific team. As we huddled together in the canyon, surrounded by the echo of our own voices calling from the darkness, I understood with crystal clarity that we weren't the hunters anymore. We were the prey. And somewhere in the freezing Nevada night, wearing faces we trusted and speaking with voices we knew, the Skinwalker was closing in for the kill. What happened in Nevada should have ended my career, should have sent me straight to a psychiatric ward with a padded room and heavy medication. But when you've seen what I've seen, when you know what's crawling in the shadows of our world, walking away isn't an option. The nightmares don't stop just because you quit. The monsters don't disappear because you close your eyes. Only Henrik made it out of Nevada alive. Brat and Silset. I try not to think about what the Skinwalker did to them, how it wore their faces while it hunted me through those frozen canyons. The official report listed them as KIA during a classified training exercise. Their families got folded flags and empty coffins. The truth got buried deeper than nuclear waste. 3 months later, I was back in the field. Solo this time. Command decided I worked better alone after what the Bureau shrinks called my trust issues. They weren't wrong. When you've heard your best friend's voice calling for help from a creature that had already consumed him, you learn that paranoia isn't a disorder. It's a survival tool. The Louisiana assignment came through on a Tuesday morning that felt like any other until I opened the classified briefing packet. 7 fishing boats found empty, drifting in the Atchafalaya Basin. No distress calls, no signs of struggle. Just abandoned vessels with their crews vanished like they'd stepped off the edge of the world. The only clue was what the Coast Guard described as unusual drag marks on the hulls. Scratches too deep and too wide to be made by any known aquatic life. But it was the photographs that made my blood run cold. Deep gouges in fiberglass and steel, arranged in patterns that suggested something with multiple rows of claws. Something big enough to reach up out of the water and pull grown men overboard without them having time to scream. I flew into New Orleans on a commercial flight, carrying my gear in cases marked scientific equipment. The city felt different than I remembered from my last visit. heavier somehow, like the air itself was holding its breath. Spanish moss hung from every tree like funeral shrouds, and even in broad daylight the shadows seemed too deep, too dark. My contact was a local guide named Baptiste, a Cajun fisherman in his 60s who'd been working these waters since he was old enough to hold a pole. His weathered hands shook as he pointed to locations on the nautical chart, his French accent thick with fear. "Dat ting, it ain't natural," he whispered, glancing nervously at the murky water lapping against his airboat. "My grand-père, he told stories about something like this, called it Le Roi Serpent, the Serpent King, said it lived in the deepest holes where the water never sees sunlight." I checked my Mossberg 590 shotgun, loaded with incendiary rounds designed to burn underwater. The phosphorus shells would ignite on contact, creating flames that could burn even when submerged. If this thing lived in the water, I was going to turn its habitat into a furnace. "How big are we talking, Baptiste?" The old man's eyes went distant, haunted. "My cousin René, he saw it last week before he disappeared. Said it was like a cottonmouth snake, but thick as a telephone pole and longer than his shrimp boat. Had arms too, human arms growing from its chest, like it was part man, part serpent. René said it looked at him with intelligence, like it was studying him for deciding whether to eat him or save him for later." We pushed deeper into the swamp as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The water was black as oil, reflecting nothing but darkness even when my flashlight beam hit it directly. Cypress trees rose from the marsh like ancient sentinels, their twisted roots creating a maze of channels and dead ends that could trap an unwary boat for days. The smell hit us first, a mixture of rotting fish and something else, something organic and wrong that made my stomach clench. Baptiste's airboat coughed and sputtered as we rounded a bend, and suddenly we were staring at what remained of the fishing vessel Marie Claire. The boat had been dragged into a cluster of cypress trees and wedged there like a trophy. Hull breaches ran along both sides, not random damage from rocks or debris, but deliberate, methodical destruction. Something had grabbed the vessel and systematically torn it apart, section by section, looking for the crew hidden inside. "Mon Dieu," Baptiste whispered, crossing himself. "That's Paul Thibodeau's boat. He's got 4 kids." I studied the damage pattern through my binoculars. The tears in the fiberglass were precise, calculated. This wasn't a mindless predator acting on instinct. This was intelligence at work. The creature had known exactly where to strike to breach the hull without sinking the vessel immediately. It wanted the crew alive when it pulled them out. "Baptiste, I need you to set up those incendiary charges along the perimeter, just like we discussed. Create a circle of fire traps about 50 yards out. If this thing comes at us, I want it funneled into a kill zone." The old Cajun nodded nervously and began placing the thermite devices among the cypress roots. Each charge was rigged with a motion sensor. Anything larger than a human moving through the water would trigger an explosion of white-hot flame. It was crude but effective, like turning the entire swamp into a minefield. As the last traces of sunlight faded from the sky, the swamp came alive with sounds. Bullfrogs croaked in rhythmic chorus, nightbirds called from the canopy, and somewhere in the distance, an alligator's bellow echoed across the water. Normal sounds, natural sounds. But underneath it all, I could hear something else. A subtle displacement of water. Too large and too regular to be anything that belonged in this ecosystem. "It's here," I whispered to Baptiste, raising my shotgun. "Stay behind me and keep that spotlight ready." The water in front of us began to ripple, not with the random patterns of wind or current, but in deliberate waves that radiated outward from some massive submerged presence. My thermal scope picked up nothing. The creature's body temperature matched the swamp water perfectly, making it invisible to infrared detection. Then Baptiste's spotlight caught it, and I understood why René had been driven half-mad by what he'd seen. The Serpent King rose from the black water like something from humanity's oldest nightmares. Its body was indeed serpentine, easily 40 feet long and thick as a tree trunk, covered in scales that shifted from black to dark green depending on the angle of light. But it was the human characteristics that made it truly horrifying. Muscled arms protruded from its chest, each ending in hands that retained human proportions but bore claws like curved daggers. Its head was the worst part, fundamentally reptilian, but with disturbingly human features. eyes that held malicious intelligence, a mouth that could smile while revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. When it spoke, the voice was melodious, almost hypnotic, like a southern preacher delivering a sermon. "Well, well, what have we here? Well, what have another hunter come to play in my domain?" The creature's speech was perfect English with a cultured accent that belonged in a university lecture hall, not the throat of a swamp monster. It knew what I was, knew why I was here, and it was amused by my presumption. "You're responsible for the missing fisherman," I said, keeping my shotgun trained on its center mass. "Responsible? I prefer the term curator. Those men were selected for their quality, their flavor, their contribution to my collection." The Serpent King's human arms spread wide in a gesture of false hospitality. "I've been so lonely in these waters, and feeding on nothing but fish and the occasional alligator. Human prey offers such exquisite terror, such delicious desperation." Baptiste whimpered behind me, and I could smell the fear sweat coming off him in waves. The creature's eyes fixed on the old Cajun with predatory hunger. "Ah, and you've brought me a local vintage. How thoughtful." Its massive coils began to shift, positioning for a strike. "The natives have such interesting stories about me, passed down through generations. They call me king, did you know that? Le roi serpent. I do so enjoy the reverence." I squeezed the trigger. The incendiary round struck the creature's center mass, igniting in a burst of white phosphorus flame that turned night into day. The Serpent King shrieked, not with an animal roar, but with very human agony that echoed across the swamp like a damned soul's wail. But it didn't go down. The creature's scales had somehow deflected most of the blast, and the fires that should have burned through its flesh merely flickered across its surface before being extinguished by the swamp water it displaced with its thrashing. I pumped another round into the chamber, but the Serpent King was already moving. It came at us not like a snake, but like a swimmer, using its human arms to propel itself through the water with terrifying speed. Baptiste screamed and gunned the airboat's engine, but we were hemmed in by cypress trees on 3 sides, nowhere to run. The creature's massive head rose from the water inches from our bow, close enough that I could see my reflection in its ancient, intelligent eyes. Its human arms reached for Baptiste, claws extended to drag him into the black water. I emptied my shotgun into its face, watching phosphorus flames dance across its scaled features. Each shot made it flinch and hiss, but didn't penetrate deeply enough to cause real damage. This thing had been alive for decades, maybe centuries, and it had learned how to survive hunters like me. "Your weapons are impressive," it said calmly, even as flames licked around its jaws. "But I have adapted to far worse than human ingenuity. The Acadians tried to kill me with nets and spears 200 years ago. Confederate soldiers shot me with muskets during the Civil War. Oil company mercenaries used dynamite in the 1960s. Yet here I remain." The Serpent King's coils suddenly wrapped around the airboat's hull, and I felt the vessel being lifted bodily from the water. Baptiste fell backward, his spotlight spinning wildly and casting chaotic shadows through the cypress canopy. We were 40 feet in the air now, held in the creature's grip like a toy. "I think I'll save you for last, Hunter," it whispered, bringing its face close to mine. "Your friend here smells of fear and desperation. Delicacies I rarely get to savor. But you smell of something else. Something that will make your eventual consumption all the more satisfying." The creature's human hands reached for Baptiste, who was cowering in the boat's stern. Those claws would gut the old man like a fish, and there wasn't a thing I could do to stop it from 30 feet away. That's when I remembered the thermite charges. "Baptiste!" I shouted. "The detonator! Hit the manual override!" The old Cajun's eyes went wide with understanding. His shaking hand found the remote detonator clipped to his belt, and he jammed down on the emergency button that would trigger every incendiary charge simultaneously. The swamp exploded into flame. 50 thermite charges detonated in perfect sequence, turning the entire area into a hellish inferno that reached temperatures of over 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Cypress trees burst into flame like giant torches, and the water itself seemed to burn as chemical fires spread across the surface. The Serpent King dropped us immediately, its agonized scream drowning out even the roar of the flames. Our airboat crashed into the burning water, and I felt the impact drive the air from my lungs as we went under. The world became a nightmare of fire and suffocating darkness. I couldn't tell which way was up, couldn't breathe, couldn't see anything but flickering orange light filtering through the black water. My lungs burned for air, and I could feel the incendiary chemicals eating through my tactical vest. Then something grabbed me, not with claws or teeth, but with human hands. The Serpent King had found me in the chaos, and it was dragging me deeper into the swamp, away from the flames and toward some underwater lair where it could finish what it had started. I pulled my combat knife from its sheath and drove it deep into the creature's arm. It released me instantly, dark blood clouding the water around us. But I was still 30 feet underwater in a burning swamp, and my lungs were screaming for oxygen. The creature circled me in the darkness, just beyond the reach of the flames above. I could see its eyes glowing with bioluminescent fury as it prepared for another attack. This time, there would be no escape. No clever tactics or superior firepower. Just two predators locked in a fight to the death in an environment where only one of us could survive. The Serpent King came at me from below, jaws open wide enough to swallow me whole. In that moment, with my vision going black from oxygen deprivation and the taste of swamp water filling my mouth, I made the only choice that mattered. I let it swallow me. You're probably wondering how I survived being swallowed by a 40-foot serpent in a burning Louisiana swamp. The answer is simpler than you'd think, and more horrifying than you could imagine. I cut my way out from the inside. The Serpent King's throat was lined with backward-facing teeth designed to prevent prey from escaping. But they weren't designed to stop someone with a ceramic combat knife and nothing left to lose. I carved through cartilage and muscle until I found something vital. What I hoped was the creature's heart. When I drove my blade into that pulsing organ, the beast's death throes launched me back into the burning swamp like a human cannonball. Baptiste pulled me from the water more dead than alive. Third-degree burns covered 60% of my body, and I'd swallowed enough contaminated swamp water to kill a horse. The doctors at Walter Reed said I'd never be field-ready again. They were wrong, but it took 18 months of surgery and physical therapy before I could hold a rifle steady. The nightmares started during recovery, not just memories of past missions, but prophetic dreams of something stirring in Eastern Europe. I'd wake up screaming about glowing eyes in radioactive forests, about howling that echoed through empty cities, about pack hunters that retained human intelligence while embracing their most primal instincts. The CIA psychologists called it post-traumatic stress. I knew better. Some connections transcend the physical world, and when you've killed as many supernatural entities as I have, you develop a sixth sense for emerging threats. That's when Command offered me the assignment that would either make me a legend or get me killed in the most radioactive place on Earth, Chernobyl. The briefing took place in a bunker 3 stories beneath the Pentagon, delivered by a colonel whose name I was never told and whose face I was ordered to forget. The situation was classified beyond anything I'd encountered before, codenamed Operation Blood Moon, with a presidential authorization that came straight from the Oval Office. 8 weeks ago, our satellite surveillance detected unusual thermal patterns in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, he explained, his laser pointer dancing across disturbing imagery of the abandoned city. Large heat signatures moving through the dead forests, coordinated movement patterns that suggest pack hunting behavior, and high-level tactical intelligence. The photographs that followed made my blood run cold. Massive paw prints in radioactive soil, prints belonging to something far larger than any natural wolf, with claw marks suggesting opposable thumbs. Trees had been stripped of bark in systematic patterns, creating territorial markers that formed a perimeter around the reactor complex. And scattered throughout were human remains, but not random kills. The bones had been arranged in ritualistic patterns, stacked into pyramids and circles that spoke of intelligence, purpose, and psychological warfare. We initially dismissed these as equipment malfunctions, the colonel continued, but then our assets in the region started disappearing. Ukrainian military patrols, research teams, monitoring stations going offline in sequence. Something was systematically destroying our surveillance network. He played an audio recording that made the hair on my arms stand up. Men screaming in terror, automatic gunfire echoing through empty buildings, and underneath it all, howling. But not the howl of normal wolves. This was deeper, more primal, filled with an intelligence that spoke of calculated predation and ancient hunger given new purpose. The radiation has done something unprecedented to the wolf population that remained after the 1986 disaster, the colonel explained. 37 years of constant exposure has created genetic mutations that violate every law of biology. We're calling it the alpha beast, a lycanthrope variant that makes the Nevada skinwalker look like a house pet. The next photograph showed what appeared to be a massive figure standing upright in Pripyat's main square, easily 12 feet tall, with the distinctive silhouette of something caught between human and wolf. Around it, smaller shapes moved in perfect military formation, like soldiers following orders from a field commander. "This thing has been building an army," the colonel said, fear creeping into his professional composure, turning survivors, scientists, even some of our own people who got too close. We have confirmed sightings of at least 20 transformed individuals, all showing enhanced intelligence, coordinated pack behavior, and tactical knowledge that suggests they're retaining human memories after transformation. The implications hit me like a physical blow. A werewolf pack with military training, enhanced by decades of radiation, led by something intelligent enough to build an organized fighting force. It wasn't just a supernatural threat, it was a potential invasion force. "Your mission is simple," the colonel concluded grimly. "Find the alpha beast and kill everything that moves with it. Complete extermination. The Ukrainian government has given us 48 hours before they drop a tactical nuclear weapon on the entire zone." 5 days later, I was on a military transport heading into Ukrainian airspace with a team of specialists who'd volunteered for what everyone understood was likely a suicide mission. My equipment was specifically tailored for werewolf extermination, a modified AK-74 loaded with silver-tipped hollow points blessed by 3 different denominations, a combat shotgun loaded with silver buckshot mixed with blessed salt, and enough incendiary grenades to turn the entire city into a furnace. But it was the team that really drove home the gravity of the situation. Sundown was a demolitions expert from Fort Worth, Texas, who'd earned his nickname holding off an entire werewolf pack until dawn, using nothing but improvised explosives and pure Texas stubbornness. His left arm was a patchwork of scars that looked suspiciously like bite marks, and his right eye was milky white from exposure to something he would only describe as unholy fire. He carried twice the normal load of silver core explosives, along with white phosphorus grenades that could burn underwater and thermite charges hot enough to melt through steel. Tansky was a former Spetsnaz operative whose grandfather had been a professional werewolf hunter during the Soviet era, part of a secret unit that dealt with supernatural threats in the Siberian wilderness. He carried an ancient Mosin Nagant rifle passed down through 5 generations, blessed by Orthodox priests, loaded with hand-cast silver bullets, and inscribed with Cyrillic prayers that supposedly made it lethal to creatures that defied natural order. He spoke in whispers about the old ways of dealing with lycanthropes, carrying pouches of wolfsbane, blessed salt, and holy water prepared according to recipes that predated the Russian Revolution. And Cuff was a military chaplain whose specialty was combat exorcism, battlefield spiritual warfare that most people dismissed as medieval superstition. He carried a silver crucifix the size of a combat knife, enough holy water to baptize an army, and religious artifacts from 12 different faiths that he claimed were effective against various supernatural entities. His eyes held the fervent intensity of a man who'd seen evil in its purest form and lived to fight another day. We parachuted into the exclusion zone at 0200 hours on a moonless night, landing in a forest where trees grew twisted and gnarled, their bark scarred with claw marks that reached impossible heights. The silence was absolute. No insects, no birds, no small animals. Even the wind seemed reluctant to move through this desolate landscape, as if nature itself had abandoned this place. My radiation detector started clicking immediately, but the readings were inconsistent, spiking and falling in patterns that suggested something was actively manipulating the radioactive environment. The background radiation should have been steady, predictable. Instead, it pulsed like a heartbeat, concentrated in specific areas as if something was feeding on it. "The contamination levels are all wrong," Tansky observed, studying his instruments with a deepening frown. "It's as if something is channeling the radiation, concentrating it for specific purposes. My grandfather told stories of creatures that grew stronger from poison, but I never believed them." The abandoned city of Pripyat loomed through the darkness like a monument to human hubris, But unlike the ghost town I'd expected, the city showed signs of recent habitation. Fires burned in apartment windows, casting dancing shadows on walls that hadn't seen legitimate light in decades. Electrical cables had been strung between buildings in patterns that served no obvious purpose, creating networks that suggested communication systems. And everywhere, painted in what looked suspiciously like blood, were territorial markings. Symbols that combined Cyrillic letters with ancient runes that predated human civilization. "Pack marks," Cuff whispered, making the sign of the cross. "The Alpha is claiming territory, marking hunting grounds, establishing hierarchies. This isn't random predation. It's building a kingdom." As we moved through empty streets, I noticed some markings were recent, still wet, still warm when detected by thermal sensors. Whatever had created them was nearby, possibly watching us from the shadows of abandoned buildings. The sensation of being observed was overwhelming, that primitive instinct that kept our ancestors alive when they were prey animals. The howling started just after 300 hours. It began as a single voice, deep and resonant, echoing across the empty city like a war horn calling troops to battle. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, reverberating off concrete walls until it became impossible to determine its source. Then others joined in. A dozen voices, then 20, then too many to count. The cacophony wasn't just communication, it was coordination. The pack was organizing for a hunt, and we were the designated prey. Movement, multiple contacts, staying in shadows, Sundown whispered, his Texas drawl tight with tension. I count at least 15 distinct heat signatures, all human-sized or larger, moving in flanking formations around our position. Through my night vision scope, I could see shapes moving between buildings. Humanoid but wrong, too large and too fast to be human, moving with fluid grace while maintaining tactical discipline. They moved in coordinated patterns, using cover, communicating through hand signals that spoke of retained human intelligence twisted into something far more dangerous. The first attack came without warning, a coordinated assault demonstrating military-level tactical planning. Cuff screamed as something massive crashed through the wall behind us, bypassing our perimeter and attacking from an unexpected angle. Its claws raked across his blessed silver armor, leaving deep gouges that should have been impenetrable. The creature that emerged was a nightmare fusion of man and wolf, 9 feet of muscle and fur, with hands that retained human dexterity but ended in claws like curved daggers. Its transformation was recent enough that I could still see traces of the man it had once been, but those human features only made it more horrifying. "Fresh meat," it said in perfectly articulated English, its voice a bass growl that shook the ground. "And you smell of silver and sanctification. Hunters, it's been so long since we've had proper sport." More werewolves emerged from surrounding buildings, their approach coordinated with military precision. Some had transformed completely, becoming living weapons of fur and fang. Others retained more human characteristics, walking upright, using tools, communicating in complex patterns that suggested unit cohesion despite their monstrous appearances. These weren't mindless beasts. They were intelligent predators who'd retained tactical training even after transformation. I emptied half my magazine into the lead creature's chest, watching silver core rounds tear through flesh and bone. The werewolf staggered, dark blood streaming from multiple wounds, but it didn't go down. Instead, it smiled, actually smiled, revealing teeth designed for tearing through steel as easily as flesh. "Fall back to the school!" Tansky shouted, his antique rifle barking as hand-cast silver bullets found their marks. "High ground, better defensive positions, and blessed ground." We fought a running battle through Pripyat's empty streets, our blessed silver ammunition proving effective but not decisive against creatures enhanced by decades of radioactive mutation. The werewolves were incredibly resilient, absorbing multiple hits before going down, and they coordinated attacks with tactical sophistication that made them exponentially more dangerous than simple monsters. Sundown fell first, overwhelmed by 3 werewolves while setting charges in a choke point. His screams cut off abruptly, replaced by wet tearing sounds that I tried not to think about. Through my scope, I could see the creatures working together systematically, their coordinated dismantling of his position speaking of intelligence and strategic thinking. Cuff lasted until we reached the school, using his holy water to create barriers that the creatures seemed genuinely reluctant to cross. The blessed ground provided some protection, forcing werewolves to approach more cautiously, but even sanctified earth couldn't protect him when the alpha beast finally made its appearance. The thing that had once been human stood 12 feet tall and weighed at least 800 pounds of pure muscle and predatory instinct. Its transformation was complete. No trace of humanity remained in its yellow eyes or elongated snout. But when it spoke, the voice was cultured, educated, like a professor delivering a lecture. "Mikkel Holm," it said, my name rolling off its tongue like a familiar prayer. "Yes, I know who you are. Your reputation precedes you, Hunter. The Skinwalker of Nevada, the Serpent King of Louisiana. Impressive kills, legendary encounters, but you've never faced anything like me." The alpha beast stepped into moonlight, and I could see the full extent of its mutations. The radiation hadn't just made it larger and stronger, it had enhanced its intelligence, given it abilities that defied biological possibility. Its claws dripped with a substance that hissed when it hit the ground, eating through concrete like acid. Its fur seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating patches of absolute darkness. And its eyes held an intelligence that spoke of retained memories, scientific knowledge, and strategic thinking. "I was Dr. Alexei Kirkova," it continued, circling me with predatory patience while its pack maintained respectful distance. "Chief researcher at the Institute for Radiological Studies, specializing in long-term radiation effects on biological systems. I came here to study wildlife populations. Instead, I became something far more magnificent." The creature's casual tone was almost worse than outright hostility. It wasn't just a monster. It was a scientist who had embraced its own transformation, studied its mutation, and decided that becoming an apex predator was an improvement over humanity. Tansky tried to flank the creature, his silver-blessed rifle aimed at what should have been a kill shot. But the alpha beast moved faster than physics should have allowed, crossing 20 feet in a single bound and backhanding the Russian soldier with enough force to send him crashing through a concrete wall. The sound of impact was sickening. Bones breaking, organs rupturing, the wet finality of human fragility meeting irresistible force. "The radiation changed us in ways your primitive biology cannot comprehend," the creature explained conversationally. "Enhanced our regeneration, strength, cognitive abilities. We're not just werewolves. We're the next step in human evolution, perfectly adapted for survival in a world that has forgotten how to fear the darkness." I backed toward the school's upper floors, hoping to gain tactical advantage, but the alpha beast followed with leisurely confidence. Its massive form somehow squeezed through doorways that should have been too small, its supernatural physiology apparently able to alter density at will. Behind it, I could hear the pack climbing exterior walls, moving to cut off any escape route. "You cannot kill what has transcended mortal flesh," it said, yellow eyes reflecting my muzzle flashes as I pumped silver rounds into its chest. The bullets penetrated, drew steaming blood, made it stagger, but didn't stop its inexorable advance. "We heal from any wound, adapt to any weapon. Your blessed ammunition is merely an annoyance." But I had one advantage the creature didn't know about. The shaped charge Sundown had prepared before his death. Hidden in my tactical vest was a device loaded with blessed silver powder, white phosphorus, and thermite compounds that had been sanctified by religious authorities from 12 different faiths. It was designed to create a localized inferno hot enough to melt steel, and the silver particles suspended in flame would ensure anything caught in the blast wouldn't regenerate. "You're right," I told the alpha beast as I slowly reached for the detonator. "I can't kill you with conventional weapons." The creature's head tilted, genuinely curious. "Then what do you hope to accomplish?" "I don't need to kill you," I replied, flipping the arming switch. "I just need to trap you long enough for the real weapon to arrive." The alpha beast's eyes widened as it grasped the implications. "The nuclear strike. You're planning to die here, to sacrifice yourself to ensure our destruction. You'll die too, Hunter." "Probably," I agreed, checking the timer that showed 30 seconds until detonation. "But I'll take you and your pack with me. Sometimes that's what heroism looks like, dying for something bigger than yourself." The school we were fighting in sat directly above Pripyat's main natural gas line, a pipeline that had been dormant since evacuation, but still contained enough methane to level several city blocks. Sundown had placed charges along the line during our retreat, turning the entire building into a massive bomb. The alpha beast lunged at me with desperate fury, claws extended to tear out my throat before I could complete the sequence. But I was already moving, diving through a window as the building exploded behind me in a pillar of white-hot flame that turned night into day. The blast that followed was visible from space, a mushroom cloud of fire and radioactive debris that consumed everything in a half-mile radius. The school, the pack, the alpha beast, and most of downtown Pripyat simply ceased to exist, replaced by a crater that glowed with residual heat and supernatural fire that burned in colors that didn't exist in normal physics. I should have died in that explosion. The fall alone should have killed me, not to mention the radiation exposure and fragments of burning debris that tore through my body armor. But somehow, I survived, protected by equipment, blessed by every major religion, and reinforced with enough silver and holy artifacts to establish a shrine. The rescue team found me 3 days later, more dead than alive, but still breathing in defiance of biology and physics. They say I absorbed enough radiation to kill 20 men, that my body should have shut down from cellular damage, that the supernatural energies should have torn my soul apart at the molecular level. But here I am, telling you this story, bearing witness to things that officially never happened. The Chernobyl exclusion zone remains sealed to this day, with additional restrictions around the area where Pripyat used to stand. The official story is that a gas leak caused the explosion, requiring expanded containment protocols. But I know the truth. Buried under thousands of tons of radioactive rubble, in a crater that still glows with unnatural fire, something waits. The alpha beast isn't gone. Not completely. Creatures like that don't die easily, and radiation has a way of preserving things that should stay dead. Sometimes when the wind is just right and the moon is full, I can still hear howling from Ukraine's direction. It remembers me, just as I remember it. We're connected now. Predator and prey locked in an eternal dance that will only end when one of us finally finds a way to break free. That's why I keep hunting. Why I keep taking the missions that no one else will touch. Because somewhere out there, in places where reality grows thin and the laws of nature bend like heated metal, monsters are waiting. And when they come, not if, but when, someone needs to be ready to stand between them and everything we hold dear. My name is Mikkel Blackjack Holm, and I am the last elite cryptid hunter. I've faced the Skinwalker's deception in Nevada's frozen desert, survived the Serpent King's embrace in Louisiana's burning swamps, and walked away from the Alpha Beast's nuclear funeral pyre in Chernobyl's radioactive ruins. The rules of engagement are simple. Shoot first, ask questions later. Because in this war between humanity and the impossible, hesitation isn't just a mistake, it's extinction. The hunt never ends. It just finds new prey. And sometimes, if you listen carefully in the quiet hours before dawn, you can hear them calling your name from places that exist beyond the boundaries of our fragile reality.